The blizzard erases Aspen, Colorado. High in a glass mansion, an 8-year-old boy watches in terror as his paralyzed father is dragged into the storm. The one person who should have protected him smiles as she closes the door. The boy follows, his cries swallowed by the snow, but his whisper of despair is heard by the only one who can find him, a police canine named Zeus. In the hospital, behind a mask of perfect grief, a plan to steal a fortune is set. But the villains don't know about the two witnesses, the boy who saw everything and the paralyzed father who can only communicate by blinking his eyes. This isn't just a rescue. It's a race to expose the truth before a killer can silence them forever. What happens next will make you believe in the power of a child's courage and a dog's unbreakable loyalty. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments below. If you believe that the innocent must be protected, hit subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to see a miracle. The blizzard did not arrive in Aspen. It descended, swallowing the mountain whole. It was a suffocating, soundless white, a physical weight that pressed against the sprawling fortress of glass and cedar, insulating it from the world. The wind moved through the jagged peaks, not with a howl, but with a low, scouring moan that vibrated deep in the bones of the house. Inside, shielded from the elements but not from the cold, 8-year-old Caleb Vance was hidden in the alcove of his bedroom, his knees drawn to his chest. He was small for his age, with his father's dark, serious eyes that saw too much and understood more than he was given credit for. He was listening. The house had been full of wrong sounds ever since his father married Serafina. He heard their voices from the grand hallway below, his stepmother's, a low, melodic purr, and the clipped, nervous tones of Marcus Slade. Serafina Vance was 30, a woman of sculpted porcelain beauty, with ash-blonde hair pulled into a severe knot, and eyes the color of a winter lake, reflective and frigid. She moved with a liquid grace that Caleb found terrifying. Marcus, 40, was his father's chief financial officer, a man who wore his bespoke suits like armor, his face a mask of polished, reassuring angles that never quite concealed the predatory hunger in his gaze. "It has to be tonight," Marcus whispered, his voice tight. "The storm is perfect cover, an accident. He was always so despondent." Caleb pressed his ear to the floorboards. "The boy?" Marcus asked. Serafina laughed, a sound with no warmth. "He's afraid of his own shadow. He won't be a problem. Just be ready with the tarp." Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He crept to his door, cracking it open just enough to see Marcus pass Serafina a small dark vial. She palmed it, her movements fluid and practiced, and then turned, gliding silently toward his father's study. Elijah Vance, 45 and lean with the distracted energy of a true intellectual, was lost in a world of equations. His study was his sanctuary, a warm room of mahogany and flickering holographic schematics. He was a brilliant inventor, a man who had walled himself off with work since his first wife's death, leaving him vulnerable. He didn't hear Serafina enter. "Still at it, my love?" she murmured. He startled, his focus slowly returning. She was already beside him, a vision in a cream cashmere dress, holding a heavy crystal tumbler of whiskey. "I thought you might need something to keep the chill away. The wind sounds dreadful." Elijah gave her a tired, grateful smile. He saw her ambition as vibrancy, her coolness as strength. "Thank you, Sarah. That's thoughtful." He took the glass, the aroma of peat and smoke, a familiar comfort. He trusted her. He drank it down in 2 long, appreciative swallows, then turned back to his screen. The warmth came first, a pleasant bloom in his chest, but it didn't stop. It became a heavy, chemical tide, a creeping numbness that rose from his limbs. His fingers went thick and clumsy on the keyboard. A cold spike of alarm shot through his brain. He tried to stand, but the command from his mind to his legs was severed. He was being unplugged. He tried to speak her name, but his tongue was a lead weight. The paralysis solidified, a horrifying, invisible concrete setting around him. The crystal tumbler slipped from his nerveless grasp, shattering on the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the insulated silence. Elijah crashed sideways from his chair, his body inert, his mind screaming. He was trapped, a ghost in his own flesh, his eyes wide and frantic. Serafina stepped back to avoid the spill, her beautiful face a mask of detached curiosity. She crouched, peering into his terror-filled eyes. "Oh, good," she whispered, her voice flat and clinical. "He's in there. I was worried we used too much. The study door opened again, and Marcus entered, his face pale and sweating despite the cold. He was pulling a heavy, rolled-up plastic tarp. "Is it done?" he hissed. "He's paralyzed. Help me get him on this," Serafina commanded, her voice stripped of its melodic purr, now sharp and efficient. From the upstairs landing, Caleb watched, his small hand pressed so hard against his mouth he could taste blood. He had seen his stepmother enter the study. He had seen the glass shatter. And now he watched in frozen, soundless horror as they rolled his father's limp body onto the tarp like a discarded rug. He saw his father's hand, trailing limp against the floorboards as they began to drag him. That hand, the hand that fixed his toys and tucked him in at night, broke the spell. As Serafina and Marcus grunted, pulling their heavy burden toward the rear terrace, Caleb bolted. He didn't make a sound. He scrambled into his room, yanked on his snow boots, and pulled his parka over his pajamas. Elijah felt the agonizing scrape of the tarp across the floor, then the sudden, shocking blast of the blizzard as the terrace doors slid open. The cold was a physical blow, flaying his skin, stealing the air from his paralyzed lungs. The sting of the ice on his open, unblinking eyes was the only thing he could feel. He was dragged off the terrace, a dead weight, into the churning, waist-deep drifts. Caleb slipped out the side door, a tiny shadow in the blinding white. He could barely see the two dark figures ahead, struggling against the wind, their tracks vanishing almost instantly. He followed, his small legs pumping, his lungs burning, driven by a primal terror that was stronger than the storm. He saw them reach the ravine at the edge of the property, a steep, rocky drop now filled with a deep cushion of snow. With a coordinated heave, they rolled Elijah off the tarp. He felt his body tumble, crashing through the brittle crust before settling halfway down the embankment, his paralyzed face pointing up at the raging, indifferent sky. Serafina stood at the edge, breathing heavily. She slid down the bank slightly, brushed a single snowflake from his unblinking eyelid, and whispered, "Good night, my love." Then she and Marcus turned, fighting their way back to the warm, bright house, the tarp flapping between them. Caleb hid behind a massive pine tree, his body rigid, until their figures were swallowed by the snow. The world was just wind and cold, and the terrible silence they left behind. He waited one beat, then two. They were gone. He stumbled, half running, half falling, down the snowy slope, his small boots sinking deep. He fell onto his father's chest, grabbing the lapels of his coat. "Dad, Dad, get up! It's cold! Wake up!" He shook his father, but the man was unresponsive, his eyes wide open, staring at the storm, a single tear frozen on his cheek. The reality crashed into him. "No, no, please, Caleb screamed, pounding on his father's chest. "Dad, Dad, wake up! Don't leave me!" He collapsed onto his father, his small body shaking with sobs, his face buried in his father's snow-covered coat. His cries were frantic, desperate sounds of pure despair, swallowed instantly by the roaring, white void. The void that swallowed Caleb's cries was absolute. The storm was a deafening, suffocating entity, a living wall of white noise that consumed sound and light with equal ferocity. The boy's frantic screams were stolen by the wind, his small body draped over his father's chest, acting as a desperate, failing shield against the elements. He was 8 years old and fading fast, the adrenaline of his terror giving way to the insidious lethargy of the cold. His tears froze on his cheeks, his sobs reduced to tiny, shuddering gasps. He didn't know that his father, Elijah, was still conscious beneath him, a paralyzed, silent witness to his son's despair, feeling the boy's small heart hammering against his own frozen chest. Elijah was fighting, not against the paralysis, but against the blackness, clinging to the sound of his son's voice as the only anchor in a sea of ice. Miles away, but closing, the only other sign of life in the blizzard was the heavy rhythmic crunch of specialized tires on the snow-packed road. A Pitkin County Sheriff's SUV, headlights cutting feeble cones into the chaos, was moving slowly, its wipers fighting a losing battle. Behind the wheel sat Officer Kalen Cale Riley, 32, his face a lean map of sharp angles and a closely trimmed dark beard that was already frosted with ice from his last stop. Kyle was a transplant from the Denver PD, a man who had fled the gunfire and cynicism of the city, only to find a different, colder kind of isolation in the gilded cage of Aspen. He was sharp, observant, and fundamentally weary. He didn't trust the quiet or the wealth, He knew that rot festered just as easily in mansions as it did in tenements. In the passenger seat, panting lightly, sat Zeus. Zeus was a 4-year-old German shepherd, 90 pounds of disciplined muscle, black and tan fur, and an intelligence that Kale trusted more than any human partner. He was a fully certified K9, trained in tracking and apprehension, but he was also Kyle's only confidant. "Last check on the 82 cutoff, Z," Kale muttered, his voice gravelly from the dry heater air. "Then we'll see about that steak I saved you. This night is a bust." Zeus merely huffed, his warm breath fogging the window, his eyes scanning the impenetrable white. They were checking on stranded vehicles, a routine task in a storm this bad. Kyle was about to turn the SUV around at a private driveway gate when Zeus suddenly changed. It wasn't a bark, it was a shift in pressure. His body went rigid, his ears pivoted forward like radar dishes, and a low woof vibrated deep in his chest. He stood, his paws on the dashboard, his nose pressed against the air recirculation vent, tasting the wind. "What is it, bud?" KL said, slowing the vehicle. "Elk? Coyote?" He peered through the snow. Nothing. Just the imposing, electronically gated entrance to the Vance estate. "It's private property, Z. Stand down." But Zeus didn't stand down. He escalated. A high-pitched, frantic whine escaped his throat, and he began to paw at the window, his claws ticking on the glass. Then came the bark. Not his aggressive patrol bark, but his find alert. It was a sound Kyle had heard only twice before, once for a missing hiker, and once for a child trapped in a collapsed structure. It was the sound for human distress. Kyle's weariness vanished, replaced by a cold surge of adrenaline. "Show me." He killed the engine, plunging them into the deafening roar of the storm. He hit the spotlights, illuminating a wall of swirling snow and the massive wrought iron gate. The sound was still there, faint, but now Kale could hear it too. It wasn't the wind. It was high-pitched, desperate, and dying. "Dispatch, this is Kilo 4, he spoke into his radio, his voice suddenly sharp. "I'm at the Vance estate on Maroon Creek. My K9 is alerting on the property. I'm going to investigate on foot. Send backup for a possible welfare check." He didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed his high-powered flashlight and jumped out, the wind ripping the door from his hand. "Zeus! Mitt!" Zeus was already out, a dark shape against the snow, his nose down, pulling Kyle toward a gap in the fence line. They plunged into the unplowed drift, the snow instantly over their knees. It was brutal, agonizing work. Kale, breathing hard, followed the dog, who was now plowing through the snow with singular, desperate purpose. They moved past the dark, silent mass of the main house, a fortress of warm lights, oblivious to the drama unfolding just 200 yards away. Zeus led him toward the ravine. The sound of crying was weaker now, almost gone. Kyle crested a small rise and his flashlight beam found them. The beam illuminated a scene of surreal horror. A man, Elijah, was half buried in a snowdrift, his expensive clothes stiff, his face pale and waxy, looking like a discarded mannequin. Draped over him, barely moving, was the small, shivering form of Caleb. Zeus was instantly at the boy's side, barking, licking the child's ice-caked face, trying to elicit a response. Kyle slid down the embankment, his training screaming at him. "Kid! Hey, kid! I'm the police. Can you hear me?" Caleb's eyes fluttered, his lips blue. My dad," he gasped, his voice a tiny thread. They left him." Kale's blood ran cold. "They?" He turned his attention to Elijah, expecting to confirm a fatality. He pressed 2 gloved fingers to the man's neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing but ice. "Damn it," he tried again, shoving his fingers deeper under the jawline, feeling for the carotid. He waited. 1, 2, 3, thump. It was faint, thready, impossibly slow, but it was there. The man was alive. "Okay, kid, we're getting you out." Kale ripped off his own heavy-duty parka, the cold hitting him like a hammer, and wrapped it cocoon-like around Caleb, scooping the boy into his arms. Caleb was terrifyingly light. Kale fumbled for his radio, securing the boy against his chest. "Dispatch, Kilo 4, I have them. 2 victims, 1 adult male, 1 male child, both alive, severe hypothermia. I need EMS at my location, stat, roll rescue, and the ambulance. I'm at the West Ravine." He looked back at the house, then at the tracks. 2 distinct sets of adult boot prints leading away from the ravine, already fading. This was no accident. This was an execution. As he held the shivering boy, he turned back to Elijah one last time, brushing the snow and ice from the man's open eyes. Elijah's eyes were staring, vacant, but as Kyle watched, a flicker of agonizing consciousness entered them. The man was locked in. His frozen lips cracked open, pushing out a single frosted breath, a word that was more air than sound. Caleb. Kyle froze, his gaze locking with the paralyzed man's. He understood. This man was fighting, staying alive for the child in his arms. The distant wail of sirens began to cut through the storm. "We hear you," Kyle muttered, both to the approaching sirens and to the man in the snow. "Hold on, we're getting you both out." The ambulance ride was a howling vortex of light and sound, a chaotic breach in the storm's oppressive silence. Kyle sat compressed in the back, his own hypothermia a distant thrum against the urgent panic of the paramedics. He held Caleb, who was now wrapped in a thermal foil blanket, the boy's small, shivering body pressed against his chest. Cale's focus, however, was on the man being worked on just feet away. Elijah Vance was a ghost, his skin a waxy, blue-tinged white. He was intubated, his chest rising and falling in the artificial rhythm of a bag valve mask, his eyes taped shut. He looked nothing like the man Cale had seen fighting, the man who had whispered his son's name. He looked like a corpse. "Still got a pulse," the paramedic shouted over the siren. "Sinus bradycardia, PVCs all over the strip. Core temp is 28. We're losing him." Kyle just held the boy tighter, shielding him from the sight, watching the red and blue lights paint the swirling snow outside the windows. The ER bay at Aspen Valley Hospital was a shock of bright, sterile warmth. The doors burst open, and the controlled chaos was immediate. The man running the floor was Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief of emergency medicine. Thorne was in his early 50s, a man whose tall, lean frame and silver-gray hair, precisely parted, gave him an air of academic authority. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, and his voice, though never loud, cut through the noise with absolute precision. He was a man of science and protocol. He despised ambiguity, and the two patients being wheeled in were the definition of it. "Trauma 1, he commanded, meeting Elijah's gurney. "Status." The paramedic rattled off the vitals. "Severe hypothermia, unresponsive, found in a snowdrift, possible unknown ingestion." Dr. Thorne's eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned the monitors. "Start the warm fluid circuit. I want the bear hugger, full body, page toxicology and neurology now. Let's find out what we're dealing with." The gurney vanished behind a set of swinging doors. A pediatric nurse gently approached Cale. "I'll take him, officer." Kyle reluctantly transferred Caleb, who was mute and rigid with shock, his wide eyes tracking every masked face. "I've got him, sweetie," the nurse cooed, whisking him away to a private room. Kyle, left standing in a puddle of melting snow, felt the adrenaline begin to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep chill. He was the responding officer. He needed to make his report. He was pulling out his notebook when the main ER doors slid open, admitting a gust of wind and two more figures. It was Seraphina Vance and Marcus Slade. Cale recognized them instantly. Their faces were fixtures in Aspen's high society pages. Seraphina was the picture of frantic wifely panic. She had thrown an opulent fur coat over a black silk robe, her bare feet shoved into snow boots, her ash-blonde hair artfully disheveled. "My husband! My son!" she cried, her voice echoing in the bay. "The police called. They said there was an accident." Marcus was right behind her, playing the part of the steadfast family friend, his hand firmly on her back. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, his expression a perfect mask of grave concern. Cale watched them, his cop senses firing on all cylinders. He was a human lie detector, and something was profoundly wrong. Dr. Thorne emerged from the trauma bay, his face grim as he stripped off his gloves. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Dr. Thorne. We're doing everything we can for your husband, but he is in critical condition." Seraphina pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Oh God, is he?" Kyle watched her face. He saw the panic, he heard the despair, but he saw no tears. Her eyes were wide, blue, and perfectly dry. "His core temperature is dangerously low," Dr. Thorne continued, his voice clinical. "But we're also seeing signs of a significant neurological event. We believe he may have ingested something before the exposure." This was the moment. Serafina's mask of grief fractured, replaced by a flash of what looked like calculation. She let out a wrenching, theatrical wail and collapsed against Marcus, who held her tightly. He always said he didn't want this, she choked out. He couldn't, not after his first wife. Dr. Thorne paused, his head tilted. I don't understand. Marcus spoke, his voice smooth and authoritative. Doctor, what my wife is trying to say is that Elijah, he has a DNR, a do not resuscitate order. The words landed in the sterile air like a lead weight. Cale felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. A DNR for a healthy 45-year-old man? Dr. Thorne's analytical gaze hardened. Do you have the paperwork, Mrs. Vance? The advance directive? Serafina buried her face in Marcus's chest. It's at home, with our lawyer. I don't know. Marcus, please. Marcus, never breaking his supportive posture, met the doctor's eyes. Doctor, I am Marcus Slade, Mr. Vance's CFO and personal counsel. I can personally attest that I witnessed him sign the documents. He was adamant. He would never want to be kept alive by machines. Kyle noted the possessiveness of Marcus's hand on Serafina's back, the way his fingers splayed, the inappropriate intimacy. This was not a friend comforting a grieving wife. This was an owner claiming his property. A verbal confirmation is not a legal document, Dr. Thorne stated flatly, especially not in a traumatic context. We have a man who was found in a ravine. Until I have a signed, notarized order in my hand, my duty is to save his life. Serafina looked up, her face a mask of desperation. But Caleb, my son, is he okay? Did he see? Cale stepped forward from the shadows, his voice cutting through her performance. He's alive, ma'am. He's being treated for hypothermia, but he's conscious. Serafina's head snapped toward Cale, her eyes widening. The question she asked next chilled Cale to the bone. It wasn't, thank God, can I see him? It was, is he talking? Kyle's expression remained flat, but his gaze was like ice. He's in shock, but he's a material witness. The color drained from Serafina's face. She stumbled, and this time her faint was genuine. Marcus caught her, his own face pale. Doctor, my wife needs a sedative, and we must see our son. Dr. Thorne nodded, his expression unreadable. A nurse will take you to him. He watched them go, Serafina leaning heavily on Marcus, their heads bent close together, whispering frantically. The ER doors swung shut, leaving Coyle and Dr. Thorne alone into the hallway. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and the unspoken. Cale looked at the doctor, his voice low. She was crying, Doc. But I didn't see a single tear. Dr. Thorne pulled off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at the doors to Trauma 1, then back at Cale. And a man with a DNR, he said, his voice equally low, doesn't usually get left in a blizzard to die, officer, especially not with his son. The two men, one of law and one of science, held each other's gaze. The lie had been told, and neither of them believed it. The pediatric wing of Aspen Valley Hospital was a different world from the controlled chaos of the ER. It was a realm of enforced quiet, soft, pastel colors, and the muffled beeping of monitors, all designed to mask the sterile, underlying hum of anxiety. Kyle, having shed his snow-caked gear and cleaned up in the staff locker room, felt conspicuous, his sidearm and tactical belt a stark intrusion on the cartoon giraffes painted on the walls. He'd spent 20 minutes debriefing his sergeant by phone, carefully omitting his deepest suspicions, framing it as a tragic accident while he gathered facts. But now, his only priority was the 8-year-old boy who had survived. Caleb Vance was not just a victim, he was the only witness. He found the room at the end of the hall, but his access was immediately blocked by a nurse. She was in her 40s, with a weary, no-nonsense efficiency and a name tag that read, Diaz. Can I help you, officer? She asked, her voice low but firm, one hand resting on the partially open door. Officer Riley, Kyle said, flashing his badge. I need to speak with Caleb Vance. I was the responding officer. Nurse Diaz's expression didn't change. She checked her chart. I'm sorry, officer, but the patient is resting. His mother has requested absolutely no visitors. She and the family's lawyer are with him now, and they've requested privacy. Cale felt the first prickle of irritation. Nurse, this is an official investigation. The boy was found with his father in a ravine. I need to get his statement. And I need to follow the family's wishes and my patient's care plan, she countered, unintimidated. He's been through a severe psychological trauma. Dr. Thorne has ordered rest. Unless you have a warrant or a court order, my instructions stand. Cale's jaw tightened. He knew the legal boundaries. She was right. He was about to argue when the door opened further, and Marcus Slade stepped into the hallway, closing it gently behind him. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive shirt, his demeanor shifting from concerned counselor to legal bulldog. "Officer Riley," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. A word. He guided Cale a few feet down the hall, creating a pocket of false privacy. "I appreciate your diligence, I really do, but as Mrs. Vance's representative, I must insist. The boy is in shock. He's confused. Any statement he gives now would be unreliable, not to mention traumatic. We are invoking his right to have a guardian present, and that guardian, his mother, says no." Cale met his gaze. Marcus was projecting an aura of complete control. "Mr. Slade, I heard what the boy said at the scene. He said, 'They left him.' That's more than confusion. That's an accusation." Marcus's smile was thin, a reptilian twitch of the lips. "Officer, he was delirious, half frozen. He was referring to the storm. It left him. He was terrified, trying to make sense of a tragedy. Now, if you'll excuse us..." Cale knew he had lost this round. He gave a sharp, frustrated nod and walked away. But he wasn't retreating. He was changing tactics. He went back to the ER entrance, through the slush to his SUV. Zeus, who had been waiting patiently, rose to his feet, his tail giving a single, disciplined thump. "All right, Z," Cale said, opening the canine cage. "Change of clothes." He unclipped Zeus's heavy patrol harness and replaced it with a simpler, lighter vest that identified him as a therapy canine, a dual certification the department encouraged. "We're not cops right now, bud. We're friends. You remember how to be friendly?" Zeus looked up, his intelligent eyes understanding the shift in tone, and let out a low, vibrating whine of pure empathy. When Kyle returned to the pediatric wing, Zeus trotting calmly at his heel, Nurse Diaz was gone. Serafina and Marcus stood by the nurse's station, deep in a whispered, frantic conversation. They stopped abruptly when they saw him, and Serafina's eyes widened, a flash of genuine fear passing over her face as she saw the dog. "Officer, what is the meaning of this?" Marcus snapped, stepping in front of Serafina. "That's a canine unit. You are harassing my clients." Cale kept his voice level, projecting calm. "It's not a canine unit, Mr. Slade. This is Zeus. He's a certified therapy dog. He's the one who found Caleb in the storm. The boy was holding on to him before the paramedics arrived." He looked past Marcus to Serafina, his voice softening. "Ma'am, your son is traumatized. He needs comfort. He knows this dog. Zeus saved his life. I just want to reintroduce them. It will help him feel safe." Serafina looked trapped. Her act as the grieving mother was now in direct conflict with her fear of the witness. She couldn't possibly deny her traumatized son the comfort of the very dog who saved him without looking like a monster to the hospital staff. I don't know," she stammered. "He's usually afraid of large dogs." "He wasn't afraid of him tonight," Cale said gently. "Let's just let Zeus say hello. If the boy is scared, we'll leave immediately." Serafina looked at Marcus, who gave a tiny, imperceptible shake of his head. But it was too late. Nurse Diaz had returned, and her weary face softened instantly at the sight of the calm, noble shepherd. "A therapy dog? That's a wonderful idea," she said, overruling them. "It's exactly what he needs." Kyle entered the room. It was warm, the lights dimmed. Caleb was a small lump in the center of a large hospital bed, hooked up to a pediatric heart monitor that beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. He was pale but awake, his dark, serious eyes wide with terror. When he saw Serafina and Marcus enter behind Kyle, he visibly flinched, pulling the blanket up to his chin. "See?" Kyle said softly. "He's scared. Let's see if Zeus can help." He gave the command. "Z besuch." Visit. Zeus, a perfect gentleman, walked slowly to the bedside, his claws clicking quietly on the tile. He stopped, lowered his head, and let out a soft huff. Caleb stared at the big dog, his fear battling his curiosity. He recognized the animal. He remembered the feeling of that warm fur in the snow. Kale moved to the other side of the room, pulling out his notepad, deliberately drawing the adult's attention. "Mr. Slade, while I'm here, I just need to ask a few procedural questions about the estate. What kind of security systems do you have? Were the perimeter gates locked?" Marcus, falling for the bait, immediately went on the offensive. "Officer, those questions are entirely inappropriate at this time. I will be filing a formal complaint." While the two men were locked in their verbal sparring, and Serafina watched Kyle like a hawk, she missed the quiet miracle happening at the bedside. Caleb, ignoring the angry, quiet voices of the adults, had slowly lowered the blanket. He reached out one small, trembling hand. Zeus nudged it with his wet nose. Caleb's terror seemed to melt away, replaced by a desperate need for an ally. He shifted, making room on the bed. Zeus, sensing the invitation, placed his front paws up and rested his heavy head on the mattress. Caleb wrapped his arms around the dog's thick, warm neck, burying his face in his fur, finally finding the one safe harbor in the room. Serafina glanced over, saw the boy was calm, and turned her glare back to Kale, satisfied. The whisper was a tiny, fragile thing, a snowflake of sound in the sterile room, meant only for the dog's ear, but just loud enough for Kyle's trained hearing. "They threw him, Zeus," Caleb whispered, his voice muffled by the fur. "They threw Daddy. She and the man, they're bad." Kale's blood had turned to ice. He didn't flinch, didn't stop his line of questioning. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Slade, but I have to complete my report. What about the terrace doors?" Caleb held on to the dog tighter, his small body shaking with silent sobs. "He's cold. They threw him. Please, doggy, don't let them hurt him. Don't let them in here." Kale heard every word. He had it. It wasn't evidence. It was hearsay whispered to a dog, but it was the truth. He snapped his notebook shut. "That's all for now. I'll be in touch." He turned to the bed. "Caleb, you be good. Zeus will see you later." He gave a sharp nod to Serafina and Marcus, who looked relieved that the ordeal was over. Kyle and Zeus walked out of the room, leaving the Vipers to guard their victim. Kalen Riley walked out of the pediatric wing, Zeus heeling so closely, his fur brushed the officer's tactical pants. The moment the door clicked shut, the performance was over. The gentle, empathetic therapy dog handler vanished, and the hunter returned. The whisper, "They threw him," was a grenade that had detonated in the quiet room, and Kale was now moving on instinct and rage. He didn't know the law he would have to break, but he knew, with the certainty of a man who had seen human depravity up close, that he was going to break it. He left Zeus with a surprised orderly at the main desk, commanding the dog to plots, downstay, and strode toward the ER, his boots heavy on the polished linoleum. He found Dr. Eris Thorne in his glass-walled office, a small, organized box of sterile light, standing stiffly as he reviewed a chart. The posture of a man running on fumes and caffeine. Kale didn't knock. He entered, closing the door behind him, plunging the office into a cone of strained silence. Thorne looked up, his sharp, analytical eyes narrowing over his wire-rimmed glasses, recognizing the shift in the officer's demeanor. "You look like a man who just saw a ghost, officer." Kale planted his hands on the desk. "Worse. I just heard one." He recounted the incident in the pediatric room, his voice low and rapid, stripped of all emotion. "He saw them. He's terrified of her and Slade. He wouldn't talk to me, so he whispered it into my dog's fur. They threw him, Zeus. They're bad." He was begging the dog not to let them hurt him. Kyle leaned in, his gaze locking with the doctor's. This comes an hour after Serafina's first question wasn't, "How is my son?" but "Is he talking?" The two streams of suspicion, Kyle's gut instinct from the field and Thorne's clinical skepticism in the ER, crashed together, becoming a single terrifying flood. "And the DNR request," Thorne said, his voice a flat, cold monotone. He wasn't asking, he was stating. He was adding his evidence to Kyle's. A 45-year-old man in perfect health, and they're pushing a do not resuscitate order before he's even stabilized. Kale nodded. "They're not just waiting for him to die, Doc. They're here to finish the job. This hospital isn't a sanctuary, it's the weapon." Thorne stared at the wall for a long, heavy moment. He was a man of protocols. Protocols were the guardrails that separated medicine from chaos. To step outside them was to risk everything, his license, his reputation, his hospital. But to follow them now, to treat Serafina as a grieving spouse, was to become an accessory to murder. He picked up his desk phone, his decision made. A man can't be murdered, he said quietly, if he isn't here. He pressed a single button for an internal page. Elena, my office, now. Use the back corridor. A minute later, the door opened to admit Elena Rostova, the head nurse of the ICU. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with stern, piercing blue eyes and graying hair pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to pull her face taut. She was a formidable presence, radiating an old-world authority. She had worked with Thorne for 15 years, and their professional trust was absolute. She looked at Kale, then at Thorne. Ares. Thorne didn't waste a word. Elena, I have reason to believe the patient in ICU 3, Mr. Vance, is the target of an active homicide attempt by his wife and her partner. They are in the hospital. I am moving him. Off the books. Elena didn't blink. She didn't ask if he was sure. She didn't warn him of the consequences. She simply asked, where? The old isolation wing, 3rd floor west, Thorne replied. The one we shut down after the TB scare. It's stocked for emergencies, but it's offline. No monitors, no charts. He'll vanish from the census. He turned to Kyle. But we have a problem. They are with the boy. If they see us move him, or if they find him missing, they'll know. Kale's mind was already working. He needed to pin Serafina and Marcus down, to trap them in a bureaucratic snare. I'll handle them, Kale said. I've got a legal obligation to report. I'll call Child Protective Services. A potential endangerment case, a child found at the scene of a traumatic event. It's mandatory. That will tie them up with a social worker for at least 2 hours. Thorne nodded. The gambit was set. Good. Elena, get a gurney and a transport monitor. Meet me at the staff elevator in 5. I'll create the diversion. Kyle walked back to the pediatric wing, his face now a mask of professional regret. He found Serafina and Marcus by the nurse's station, their heads bent in a conspiratorial whisper. They looked up, hostility radiating from Marcus. Officer? I thought I made myself clear. Kale held up a hand. Mr. Slade, ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion, but given the circumstances under which Caleb was found, I've had to make a mandatory call to Child Protective Services. A social worker is en route to conduct an evaluation of Caleb's immediate safety and home environment. The color drained from Serafina's face, and Marcus's jaw clenched. That is an outrage, Marcus snarled. It's protocol, Kale said flatly. It's non-negotiable. They'll need to speak with you both. It will likely take some time. They were trapped. As Marcus began to sputter about lawsuits, Kale turned and walked away. Simultaneously, Dr. Thorne strode into the ICU, his face a mask of grave concern. He went straight to Elijah's bedside, where the unconscious man lay hooked to a dozen machines. He made a show of checking his pupils, then looked at the monitor. He turned to the unit clerk. His ICP is spiking, he announced, his voice carrying just the right amount of controlled panic. He's non-responsive to mannitol. Looks like he's blowing a pupil. He's herniating. The ICU staff snapped to attention. He needs a neurosurgeon, and he needs one 10 minutes ago. Aspen can't handle this. Get me flight for life. We're transferring him to Denver. Now. Elena Rostova arrived with the transport gurney. I'll take him, she said. They expertly unhooked Elijah, moving him to the gurney. As the CPS social worker arrived in the pediatric wing, Serafina's phone buzzed with an alert from the hospital. Elijah Vance, critical decline, prepping for emergency flight transfer. She showed the phone to Marcus. A look of profound, venomous relief passed between them. Their problem was now flying away. Thorne and Elena pushed the gurney at a run, not toward the ER bay, but toward the staff elevator. They entered, and Thorne hit the button not for the roof helipad, but for the sublevel. The doors opened into a cold, concrete utility corridor. They moved silently, the only sound the squeak of the gurney's wheels and the hiss of the portable ventilator. They took a freight elevator up to the 3rd floor, emerging into a dark, dusty hallway. Elena swiped her master keycard, and the doors to the old isolation wing hissed open. They pushed Elijah into a room at the far end, transferred him to the bed, and hooked him up to the room's standalone monitors. The man was stable. He had never been crashing at all. Dr. Thorne pulled the plastic-eyed band from Elijah's wrist. He took a blank John Doe band from his pocket, clicked it shut, and wrote on it with a black marker. John Doe, Alpha, unknown. He stepped back. Elijah Vance is on a helicopter to Denver, Thorne said quietly. As of this moment, he no longer exists. Kyle, having received a text, was already outside the wing's locked doors. He called his sergeant. "Sarge, I need a favor. I need an unmarked unit to sit on the third-floor service entrance. It's not a bust. It's a witness protection detail inside the hospital." He hung up and slipped inside, joining the doctor and the nurse. The three of them stood in the dim light, looking at the unconscious man who was now their shared, terrible secret. The third-floor isolation wing was a tomb. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight that cut through the grimy window, illuminating a room where time had stopped. The air was stale, thick with the scent of disinfectant and disuse. For 3 days, this room had been Elijah Vance's sanctuary and his prison, guarded in 12-hour shifts by Kaylin Riley and the ICU head nurse, Elena Rostova, while Dr. Aris Thorne manipulated hospital records to keep the Phantom helicopter transfer to Denver plausible. Serafina and Marcus, KL learned, had been thoroughly, agonizingly interviewed by a bulldog of a social worker from Child Protective Services. Caleb, deemed to be in an unsafe home environment pending investigation, had been placed in emergency foster care, a temporary, secure placement arranged by Cale himself, insulating the boy from his stepmother. Serafina and Marcus, satisfied that Elijah was dying states away and that Caleb was temporarily neutralized, had returned to the mansion to perform their public grief, already making inquiries with their lawyers about the Denver hospital's protocols for issuing a death certificate. They were waiting. In the dusty room on the third floor, Kyle and Thorne were also waiting. Elijah Vance woke up not with a gasp, but with a click. It was the sound of a switch being thrown, the silent reboot of a system. Awareness did not return slowly. It flooded him in one horrifying, ice-cold wave. He was not in the snow. He was in a room. He could smell the dust. He could hear the low, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a monitor that sounded old, different from the ones in the ICU. He could feel the coarse texture of the hospital blanket against his chin. And that was all. He couldn't feel his hands. He couldn't feel his legs. He tried to take a deep breath, but the air was pushed into his lungs by a machine. He tried to speak, but his jaw was lead. He tried to scream, but the air wouldn't move. It was the nightmare from the study, magnified. He was buried alive. He was entombed in his own flesh. His heart monitor, tracking the sudden, silent terror, began to accelerate, its steady beep turning into a frantic, high-pitched beep, 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 beep. Elena Rostova, who had been sitting in the corner reading, was on her feet instantly. She looked at the monitor, then at her patient. "John Doe," she said, her voice calm and firm, "you're safe. Your heart rate is climbing. I'm not going to sedate you. I need you to listen to my voice." Elijah's mind clawed at the sound. "Yes, I'm here. Help me." The beeping continued its frantic pace. Elena moved closer, her stern Slavic face softening with clinical focus. She looked at his face and froze. His eyes, which had been vacant or closed for 3 days, were wide open, and they weren't just staring, they were following her. "Aris," she said into her pager, her voice never wavering, "get up here, now, he's awake." Dr. Thorne arrived in under 2 minutes, Kyle Wright, behind him, his hand instinctively resting on his sidearm. "What is it?" Thorne asked, moving to the bedside. "His vitals?" "His vitals are erratic because he's terrified," Elena said, pointing. "Look." Thorne followed her gaze. He leaned down, his face just inches from Elijah's. "Mr. Vance, my name is Dr. Thorne. You are in the hospital. You are safe. Can you hear me?" Elijah's eyes screamed, "Yes, he can hear us," KL said, his voice flat. Thorne held up a hand. "Mr. Vance, I need you to do exactly as I say. Do not try to move anything else. Just listen. If you can hear me and understand me, blink your eyes 1 time." The room held its breath. The beeping monitor was the only sound. Elijah's mind fought the paralysis. He focused all his will, all his terror, all his rage into 2 tiny muscles. After an agonizing second, blink. A profound shared silence fell over the 3 conspirators. The horror of the situation was matched only by the relief. "Oh my God," Elena whispered. Thorne, the man of science, was already moving. "He has locked-in syndrome," he diagnosed, his voice grim. The paralytic Serafina used, combined with the severe hypothermia, it must have caused a focal infarct in his ventral pons. His higher cognitive functions are perfectly intact, but his entire motor pathway is severed, except, he looked back at Elijah, for vertical eye movement. He's been awake this whole time, cataloging, listening. Cale stepped forward, his police training taking over. "Doc, we need a system. Now," Thorne nodded. "Mr. Vance, we are going to establish communication. Blink once for yes, and blink twice for no. Do you understand?" Blink. "Good. Are you in any physical pain right now?" Blink, blink, no. A wave of relief passed over Thorne. "Good." Cale moved into Elijah's line of sight, his face set. "Mr. Vance, I am Officer Kalen Riley. I was the one who found you in the snow. I found your son, Caleb." Elijah's eyes instantly welled with tears, which began to spill, tracing a path from the corners of his eyes to his temples. "Caleb is safe," Cale said, his voice softening. "He is in protective custody. Serafina cannot get to him. Do you understand?" Blink. "Good. Mr. Vance, I need to ask you some questions. I need you to be my witness. This is vital. Do you remember what happened before you were in the snow?" Blink. "Did you go out into that storm willingly?" Blink, blink, no. "Did Serafina give you something in your drink?" Blink. "Was Marcus Slade, the man with the polished suit, was he there with her?" Blink. Cale's jaw clenched. Did they drag you outside and leave you to die?" The tears streamed from Elijah's eyes, a silent, agonizing confirmation. Blink. Cale had his witness, an inadmissible, nonverbal witness who could be murdered with a single injection of potassium chloride. "Thank you," Cale said, his voice thick. "That's all for now. You rest. We are guarding you. You are not alone." Later that night, long after the hospital had settled into its graveyard quiet, Cale used his master keycard to access the service corridors. He was not alone. Beside him, Zeus trotted silently, his nails clicking on the tile, and holding Kyle's other hand, his small fingers tight, was Caleb. Cale had signed him out of the foster home for a follow-up psychological evaluation. "Where are we going, Cale?" Caleb whispered, his voice small in the dark hallway. "It's spooky." "I know, kid, but there's someone in here who needs to see you more than anything in the world." Cale pushed open the door to the isolation wing. Caleb saw Dr. Thorne and Nurse Elena, their faces grim, and then he saw the figure in the bed, hooked up to the monitors, his face pale, his eyes wide open. Is he a ghost?" Caleb whispered, hiding behind Cale's leg. "No, son," Cale said, his voice gentle. He led Caleb to the bedside. "He's right here. He's just stuck, but he can hear everything you say. He can see you. Watch." Kyle looked at Elijah. "Elijah, I brought a visitor. Is this your son, Caleb?" Blink. Caleb's eyes widened. "Dad?" he whispered, stepping closer. He hesitantly reached out and touched his father's arm. It was warm. It was real. "Dad, it's me. I knew you weren't gone. I told Kyle. I told Zeus." At the sound of his name, Zeus nudged Caleb's hand and licked it, then rested his heavy head on the edge of his father's beat. Elijah's eyes, the only part of him that could move, were frantic. He was trying to hug his son, to speak, to comfort him, but all he could do was cry. The tears rolled silently into the pillow. Caleb, seeing his father's tears, finally understood. His father was in there. The fear that had gripped the 8-year-old for 3 days finally broke. He climbed onto the edge of the bed, careful of the tubes, and laid his head on his father's chest, just as he had in the snow. "It's okay, Dad," he whispered, his own tears starting to fall. "I'm safe. Kyle and Zeus are protecting me, and we're going to protect you. You just have to wake up, okay? You just have to fight." In the dim light of the secret room, the paralyzed man and his son were finally reunited, their silent promise witnessed by a doctor, a nurse, a cop, and a dog. The blizzard had broken, leaving Aspen in the pristine, blinding silence of a fresh start. The snow, heavy and wet, began to melt under a reluctant sun, and the town exhaled, its wealthy arteries once again flowing with ski traffic and commerce. High above the town, in the glass and cedar fortress, Serafina Vance and Marcus Slade were celebrating their victory. They were in Elijah's study, their study now, the shattered whiskey glass long since cleaned up. The room now, theirs to occupy. Serafina, draped in a white silk robe, curled on the leather sofa, swirling a glass of Elijah's 1982 Bordeaux. Marcus stood by the window in his shirt sleeves, his expensive tie loosened, looking out at the valley, the very picture of the new lord of the manor. They were on a conference call with the corporate legal team from New York. "Yes, Lawrence, we understand it's a tragedy," Marcus said, his voice a smooth balm of practiced grief. But Elijah was very clear about his wishes. "We are simply trying to honor his legacy by ensuring the stability of his assets." The disembodied voice from the speakerphone was dry, precise, and unmoved. It belonged to Lawrence Giddis, the lead counsel for the Vance estate, a man who survived on billable hours and contractual fine print. "Be that as it may, Marcus, my hands are tied. We cannot begin the liquidation of the primary trusts or execute the new will, the one you and Mrs. Vance forwarded, until we have a formal declaration of incapacitation or a pronouncement of death. And frankly," the lawyer sighed, "the paperwork from this Denver Specialized Care Facility is non-existent. We need an attending physician's signature on a PVS assessment or a death certificate. We have neither." Serafina sat up, her cold, beautiful face hardening. "What is he saying?" she whispered to Marcus. "Tell him to fix it." Marcus waved a hand at her, his smile tightening. "Lawrence, I assure you, Dr. Thorne of Aspen Valley, who managed the transfer, is coordinating. The situation is delicate." Giddis was undeterred. "The situation is frozen, Marcus. Literally, the board is getting anxious. Get me the signature or the assets remain locked. Giddis out." The line clicked dead. Serafina slammed her wineglass down. "He's stalling! That old fool is stalling!" Marcus turned from the window, his mask of control finally cracking. He was a man of numbers, and the numbers weren't adding up. "No," he said quietly, his mind racing. "He's not stalling. He's asking for something we don't have. We've been played." Serafina looked confused. "What? We won? Elijah is a vegetable in Denver? The boy is locked up in foster care? We won?" Marcus shook his head, his paranoia, the very trait that made him a successful criminal, kicking in. "It was too easy, Serafina. The emergency transfer, the brain herniation, that was Thorne. He arranged it. Why was he so helpful? Why send him to a facility we've never heard of?" His eyes narrowed. "I don't like loose threads. And Dr. Iris Thorne is a thread I need to pull." That afternoon, Marcus drove his black Range Rover to a part of Aspen the tourists never see, a gritty side street with a dive bar called the Miner's Sump, which smelled of stale beer and fried food. He stepped inside, his $1,000 suit a glaring beacon in the dim, smoky room. In a back booth sat Frank Rooker, a man Marcus kept on a quiet retainer for just such occasions. Rooker was in his late 50s, a bloated, wheezing man with watery, bloodshot eyes and a cheap trench coat that looked like it had been slept in. He was a disgraced ex-cop from Boulder who now worked as a private investigator, specializing in the dirty laundry of Aspen's elite. "Mr. Slade," Rooker rasped, not bothering to stand, "you look uncomfortable. Drink?" Marcus remained standing, his face a mask of disgust. "I need you to watch someone. Dr. Iris Thorne. I need to know where he goes, who he talks to, every minute, especially his movements inside the hospital." Rooker grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Thorne? The high and mighty Dr. Clean? Those are the fun ones. It'll cost you." Marcus threw a thick envelope of cash onto the sticky table. "Find me something dirty." 2 days later, Rooker's report was succinct. "The doc is clean," Rooker said over a burner phone. "Works 16-hour days, eats at his desk, goes home to a sad, empty condo. He's a saint. Except," Marcus sat up. "Except what?" "He's got a secret," Rooker said, clearly enjoying himself. "Twice a day he vanishes. He takes the service elevator to the 3rd floor, West Wing, the old isolation wing. The place has been shut down for years. He spends about an hour up there, then comes back down. No patients, no charts, just him and the ICU dragon lady, Rostova." Marcus's blood ran cold. A secret, offline wing. A perfect place to hide someone. "I need eyes in that wing, Frank. Now." "Already on it," Rooker said. Pulled the employee files. "The only other person who has access is a janitor. Name's Mitch, works the night shift. And he's got gambling debts up to his eyeballs at the tribal casino. He's ripe." That night, Marcus cornered Mitch in the hospital's concrete sub-basement by the humming generators. Mitch was a gaunt man in his 40s, with the hollowed-out eyes and shaking hands of a man perpetually terrified of his bookie. He flinched when Marcus, a figure of pure predatory wealth, stepped out of the shadows. "Mitch," Marcus said, his voice calm. He didn't threaten. He opened a briefcase. Inside were stacks of cash. You push your cart through the third-floor isolation wing. You find out who is in the room at the end of the hall. You get me a name, a description, or a photo. You do that, and this is all yours. Mitch stared at the money, his Adam's apple bobbing. He knew he shouldn't. He knew this was wrong, but he also knew what his bookie would do to his kneecaps next week. He nodded, his hand snatching the first stack of bills. An hour later, Mitch pushed his rattling cleaning cart into the dark, dusty corridor of the West Wing. He saw the cop, Riley, sitting in a chair outside the last door, reading a magazine, the big German shepherd at his feet. Mitch cleaned the same stretch of floor for 45 minutes until the cop finally stood, stretched, and left with his dog, presumably to use the restroom. This was his chance. Heart hammering, Mitch used his master key on the door. He pushed it open. Just cleaning, he stammered. The room was dark, but lit by monitors. The nurse, Rostova, wasn't there. There was just a man in the bed, a pale, dark-haired man, tubes running from his body, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Mitch, terrified of getting caught, just stared at the patient's wristband. It was blank, except for the handwritten words, John Doe, Alpha. He turned and fled. He met Marcus back in the basement. It's just some guy, Mitch whispered, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his keys. He's pale, dark hair. He's just staring. The bracelet says John Doe Alpha. Marcus grabbed the janitor by his shirt, slamming him against the wall. Dark hair, mid-40s, a scar on his left temple from a skiing accident. Mitch, terrified, nodded frantically. Yes, that's him. Please, let me go. Marcus released him, his mind whirling, the final terrible piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Elijah. They hadn't transferred him. They'd hidden him. The cop, the doctor, the nurse. They were all in on it. The boy had talked. They knew. Get out, Marcus hissed at the janitor, who scrambled away. He stormed back to the mansion, his composure gone. He found Serafina in the media room, already shopping for private jets online. He's alive, Marcus spat, his voice trembling with rage. Serafina looked up, annoyed. What? He's alive! Marcus roared, sweeping a lamp from a table. Elijah, he's here, in the hospital. Thorne and that cop, they hid him. The transfer was a lie. The boy talked, and they're protecting him. Serafina's face went white. He's alive? He can talk? No, Marcus said, his mind already shifting from panic to planning. The janitor said he was staring, locked in. That's why they're hiding him. They're waiting for him to recover. They're waiting for him to be a witness. Serafina began to hyperventilate. They'll arrest us. We're finished. Oh God, Marcus. Shut up, he snapped. Stop panicking. We were sloppy. We didn't confirm the body. Now, we finish it. Properly. He went to the desk, pulling up a schematic of the hospital floor plans Rooker had sent him. The cop isn't there 24/7. The nurse has a schedule. There are gaps. He pointed to a small room. Mitch's access gets me a lab coat and a master key. The crash carts on every floor are stocked with potassium chloride. It's untraceable. In a man in his critical condition, it will look like a simple, tragic heart attack. He looked at Serafina, his eyes cold and dead. He's already listed as unstable. When his heart stops this time, no one will be surprised. The third floor of the hospital, long silent, had become a hunting ground. Kalen Riley and Eris Thorne knew the breach was critical. The electronic security log for the isolation wing was the smoking gun. 0217 a.m. Access M. Mitchell. 0219 a.m. Exit M. Mitchell. 2 minutes. Just long enough to see a ghost and report back. They knew with sickening certainty that Mitch had been compromised. They were no longer protecting Elijah. They were baiting a trap. He'll come tonight, Cale stated, his voice flat, checking the clip on his sidearm. He can't risk letting Elijah recover. He'll come before the shift change, when the hospital is at its quietest. Dr. Thorne looked at the man in the bed, the patient he had risked his entire career to hide. Elijah's eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, the only sign of his terror, the accelerated beep, beep, beep of his monitor. He had heard them. He knew his killer was returning. "Elena," Thorne said into his phone, "prep an IV line with a saline lock. Make it look like a primary infusion, and get me a decoy crash cart, the one with the broken defibrillator. Stock it, but remove the KCL vials. Lock the real ones in my office. Now." He turned to Kyle. "We will be ready. He wants to play doctor. We'll let him." Marcus Slade moved through the sub-basement corridors like a surgeon. He wore a set of pale blue scrubs acquired by Mitch, a white lab coat, and a stolen-eyed badge that identified him as a lab tech. He even carried a clipboard to complete the illusion. He was just another weary cog in the hospital's graveyard shift. He felt a cold, exhilarating calm. This was just business, the final variable in a complex equation. He took the service elevator, using Mitch's keycard, and emerged on the 3rd floor. The hallway was empty, just as Rooker had reported. Kyle's 12-hour shift had ended at 6 p.m. The night shift patrolman assigned to the floor was lazy, usually found sleeping in the break room. Marcus moved silently, his rubber-soled shoes making no sound. He found the decoy crash cart Elena had left in the alcove. He opened the narcotics drawer. Just as he had planned, he saw the small, color-coded boxes. He palmed 2 vials of potassium chloride, the plastic cool against his skin, and slipped them into his lab coat pocket, along with a 10cc syringe. He approached the room at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked. He paused, listening. Nothing. Just the faint, rhythmic beep of the monitor inside. He pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the green glow of the cardiac monitor. Elijah Vance lay in the bed, a single sheet draped over him, the IV line dripping slowly into his arm. His eyes were open, staring, reflecting the green light. They shifted, locking onto Marcus as he entered. "Hello, Elijah," Marcus whispered, gliding to the bedside. He began filling the syringe, the snick of the needle puncturing the vial impossibly loud. "It's a shame, truly. You were always too smart, but never smart enough. You just wouldn't die." He tapped the syringe, expelling a tiny drop of fluid. Elijah's monitor began to beep, beep, beep faster. "Shh, shh," Marcus soothed, swabbing the IV port. "It's just me, your partner, your friend. Serafina sends her regards. She'll be much happier now. This will just stop your heart. They'll call it a complication. After all, you're a very sick man." He poised the needle over the IV line, ready to push the plunger. That's because he wasn't alone. The voice came from the shadows by the door. The main lights clicked on, flooding the room in harsh fluorescent white. Marcus spun, his arm raised, the syringe glinting. Kalen Riley stood in the doorway, his pistol aimed steady at Marcus's chest. "Police! Drop the needle!" Marcus froze, his mind racing, a cornered animal. In the same second, he heard a low, deep growl. From the darkness of the room's private bathroom, Zeus emerged, his body low, his lips curled back, his teeth bared. Marcus was trapped. He made his choice. He wasn't going to jail. He lunged, not at Kyle, but at Elijah, the needle aimed like a dagger at the man's chest. "If I go, he goes." "Zeus, fast!" Kyle yelled. The German Shepherd, trained for this exact moment, exploded across the room in a blur of black and tan. He didn't go for the throat, he went for the weapon. His powerful jaws clamped down on Marcus's arm with the force of a vice, a crunch of bone and tissue meeting the dog's teeth. Marcus screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony and rage. The syringe flew from his numb fingers, shattering against the far wall. Zeus did not release, his growl muffled as he held the arm, shaking it, pinning Marcus against the bed. Kale was on him in an instant, his knee in Marcus's back, yanking his free arm behind him. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Elijah Vance," he roared, snapping the cuffs on. Dr. Thorne and Nurse Rostova burst into the room, their faces pale but resolute. "He's secure," Kale said, breathing hard. Marcus, his face contorted in pain, spat at Kale. "You have nothing. A locked-in vegetable? He can't testify. It's my word against yours." He was still struggling when a new sound filled the room. It was a low, rasping, inhuman sound, a groan of pure, agonized effort. All eyes turned to the bed. Elijah Vance was shaking. His face was beet red, the veins in his neck standing out like cords. He was fighting at his paralysis, fighting the silence. His lips, cracked and dry, peeled back from his teeth, as he forced air from his lungs. "For," he gasped, the word a broken piece of glass. Marcus froze. "For my son." The words were slurred, barely recognizable, but they were words. It wasn't a blink. It was a voice. Elijah had spoken. The locked-in man was free. Cale stared, his own eyes wide. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Kilo 4. Takedown complete. Suspect in custody. Send a car to my location." He switched channels. "Tactical team, execute the warrant. Now." Miles away, in the glass fortress on the mountain, Seraphina Vance was pouring herself a final glass of champagne, her luggage packed for a celebratory trip to the Caymans. The doorbell rang. She smiled, thinking it was her car service. She opened the heavy cedar door, her smile freezing on her face. The porch was filled with tactical officers, their weapons aimed. "Seraphina Vance," the lead officer said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." Her champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the stone floor. Back in the hospital room, Marcus Slade, his face white with the realization of his utter defeat, was dragged away by two uniformed officers. Cale, Thorne, and Elena stood by Elijah's bed. Zeus whined softly, nudging Elijah's hand. Cale looked at the man who had come back from the dead. "It's over, Elijah," Cale said, his voice thick. "It's finally over." Elijah's eyes, which had held nothing but terror for so long, closed. And for the first time in a week, his monitor settled into the slow, steady rhythm of a man at peace. This story reminds us that even in the darkest nights and the fiercest blizzards of our lives, God is always working. A miracle is not always a loud clap of thunder. Sometimes, a miracle is the unshakable loyalty of a dog like Zeus. Sometimes, it is the courage of an 8-year-old boy like Caleb, who dares to whisper the truth, even when he is terrified. And sometimes, it is God placing the right people, like Officer Cale and Dr. Thorne, in the right place at the right time, to listen to the voice of justice. In our own lives, many of us can feel locked in, paralyzed by fear, grief, or injustice, unable to speak our truth. Elijah was locked inside his own body, but he was never abandoned. This teaches us that even when you feel most alone, even when you feel your voice has been silenced, faith is still listening. There is always a light, even if it's just the flicker of a single blink, that can cut through the darkness. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who is feeling lost or in need of a miracle. Comment Amen below if you believe that God never abandons the innocent. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, hope, and justice served. May God bless you, bless your family, and always light your path, even in the darkest of times.